Hello there, people. Welcome to another episode of Friday Flight. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me for some listener feedback this week. We've got a couple of your emails to get through and whatnot, which is great because this is helping me process the movie that I watched some hours ago. I saw Thunderbolts earlier today, and boy, do I have some thoughts. My goodness, do I have some thoughts. Stay tuned to theflightcast.com for that episode of Flight Review, probably tomorrow, more than likely, because, yeah, I've definitely got to talk about this particular film, spoiler-filled, the 36th MCU film, and boy, do I have some thoughts. A thing happened. This is just a little bit of a tease for those of you listening to this. A thing happened while I was watching Thunderbolts that, by my estimation, has never happened before in watching an MCU movie. On screen, like at the theater. Like this was unexpected. In fact, in my head, I thought, this isn't going to happen. And then it completely did, and I was powerless to stop it from happening. I will dive more into that in my full spoiler-filled review of Thunderbolts for Flight Review later on this weekend. But let's dive into some emails for this particular week, shall we? And we will begin, of course, customarily with a couple of emails from Mr. John R. This first one is an interesting set of questions he's got here. First off, he says, I'm just wondering. In fact, the email is titled, I'm just wondering. And his first question, do you ever watch Pawn Stars? I know it's hard for you to watch or listen to something or someone that supports the current administration, but are there exceptions? No, I've never watched Pawn Stars, but it has nothing to do with the fact that they support the current administration. In fact, I didn't know that until you said that, John. I don't base my television watching or my shows or movies on who supports the current administration or not. Case in point, Kelsey Grammer, historically, if you do some Google searching, has said some pro-current administration things, and not necessarily since the election, but beforehand. And, you know, they've been few and far between, though. He hasn't said nearly as much as, say, a Tim Allen or a number of others in the past, right? And Tim Allen's another example, though, of, you know, just because of, you know, things that we've heard him say in the past doesn't mean that all of a sudden I don't watch Home Improvement or, you know, and don't think he's funny. I just watched The Santa Claus for the first time this past Christmas that I reviewed on Patreon, so I don't base my television watching solely off of that. I mean, obviously, it really comes down to the subject matter and like how they're treating things and what they're saying and how outspoken they are, and that can be, you know, that can leave a bad taste for sure. But I've just never been interested in Pawn Stars. It's just not something that necessarily, like, you know, gets me going. Nothing that I am interested in. Like reality shows, I don't watch a ton of reality TV, and I can think of one. There was a short time where Shonda got me into watching Duck Dynasty, and that's because Sai was hilarious, truthfully. But it was very brief that I watched it, and then I think that the father started saying some like pro Jim Crow stuff, and it's like, okay, well, we don't need that. Don't need that show anymore. So, and that's different than, you know, supporting the current administration, although in many ways it's not different, truthfully. But either way, a little bit of that, and then also the one reality show that I've ever like really like watched, not religiously, but definitely on a consistent basis for at least a little bit, was Chris Lee Knows Best. And that was also like a recommendation from Shonda. That show was hilarious. Utterly hilarious. But I really don't watch reality TV like that. And Pawn Stars has never really, like, I've never had any interest in that particular subject, to be honest with you. So, no, not really. Can't say that I've ever been interested in it. Political affiliation or otherwise, truthfully. Your second question. He says, it seems like I'm the only person on Friday Flight who doesn't regularly give reviews of shows they're currently watching. When it comes to shows with serialization, I usually binge the whole thing within a week. I remember getting through all of the 2000s Battlestar Galactica in less than a week. What? Less than a week? Isn't that like 75 episodes plus the Razor movie or what? I don't know. I haven't finished that show. I've only like seen like the majority of season one. I need to go back and rewatch it and watch the whole thing. But wow, a week? I mean, did you have time? Were you laid off? Did you have time for it? Like working 40 hours a week. I don't see how anybody has time to do that like within a week. Not a whole show, but at any rate, no judgment. He says it makes me wonder if were there any shows that you binge marathon without a day of sleep? The last time I remember doing that, he says, was probably My Hero Academia, and I still never finished the show. I do recommend My Hero Academia, by the way. It's a great anime. It's like X-Men, The Incredibles, Invincible, Metahumans in the DC Universe, and a blender that incorporates your typical shonen anime tropes like Dragon Ball, One Piece, and Naruto. No, I've never done like an entire show. I've never been through a whole show like without sleep. I mean, not without sleep, right? Sitcoms are very easy for me to binge. In fact, over the last couple of years, let's see, I remember during work from home, I binged through all 11 seasons of Frasier for like the seventh or eighth time. I binged through Big Bang Theory. I've binged all 12 seasons of that show more than a few times, I'll say that. I've also, all 11 episodes of Cheers, all 11 seasons rather, of Cheers, because I'd never watched that show, and my mom loves that show. It's her favorite sitcom, and like that's her favorite sitcom, and Frasier's my favorite sitcom. So one day I was like, hey, they're both on Hulu. Let me check it out. I binged through Cheers. I binged through Wings. Let's see, that's also funny. That's all within the same like David Angel, may he rest in peace. Those show creators. It's all within that same universe. I binged through the Bob Newhart show because I love the MTM stuff. Because Mary Tyler Moore is like my favorite sitcom. Is like one of my favorite sitcoms from back in the day before I was even around. WKRP in Cincinnati. That's an old school sitcom that I binged through like all 5 seasons or so, but never all in one day. This was always over the course of like a couple of days to like a few weeks, if you will. Right? I've never binged through an entire show like without sleep. Even when I binge Futurama, and I've binged Futurama a couple of times. No, I have not watched the new Hulu episodes yet. I need to so that I can do a Flightbox episode about those, which I probably should do now in the middle of some stuff going on. But at any rate, no, I've never done it without sleep. There's always been like some period of like, okay, I'll watch some of these this night, and then I'll get tired and go to bed because I've probably got to go to work or do something else later on. So no, I've never binged a whole thing, like a whole show without sleep. No, I would never have time to do that personally. Number 3, he says, I'm gonna do something I think you mean I haven't done in a while. He calls it red pill versus blue pill. Okay. So first, the red pill. He says, you wake up on a colonized Mars. Doesn't have to be the South African Nazi who does it, but you move to Mars for college. Yes, I'm taking a page from Futurama. Oh, Mars University, which I'm guessing you went to college in the year 2000 or 2001. 2001, yep. He says you find out World War III is happening down on Earth while you're up there. Your friends and family decide to move up there with you to avoid being killed. And you get to meet Shonda and her family on the Red Planet in this reality. Hollywood can't make movies during World War III, so Mars has to make its own. Completely different movies are made, he says. I asked ChatGPT what superhero movies come out, and the schedule largely remains the same, except Iron Man sequels, Thor, and Captain America don't happen, and a lot of the MCU movies are skipped, and Martian Manhunter has a big role in Justice League, I guess, because Mars? Well, that would make sense. Also, a Transformers film called Transformers The First Five, he says. Also, people on social media are nicer because of World War III. Do you take the red pill? All right, that's the red pill. What about the blue pill? The blue pill is you wake up in a reality where Gandhi, JFK Sr., MLK Jr., RFK Sr., and John Lennon weren't assassinated. The world has become a happier place to live. Homelessness is gone. Nobody is in prison. The world is a nice place to live. But there are a few caveats. 1, the internet is only allowed for use for the government and libraries. 2, fast food is outlawed. 3, meat is outlawed. 4, football is outlawed as it is deemed too violent. 5, violent movies and TV shows are tame at best, PG. Do you take the blue pill? Okay. Interesting. I can see why you would consider the first one, the Mars situation, the red pill, and the second one, the blue pill. Quite honestly, I think I'd take the blue pill, which is not obvious. That's not what I would take. Obviously in the Matrix, you're supposed to take the red pill and go down the rabbit hole, right? That's how you escape the Matrix. And in this case, though, I would definitely take the blue pill. Why? Because 1, less people would die. 2, I wouldn't have to leave Earth. 3, a lot of stuff, like you said, Gandhi, JFK Sr., MLK, all those people, all those peacemakers not assassinated. And yes, a more benevolent Earth. Yeah, I will take the scenario with a more benevolent Earth. I will. And yeah, I know that means no more football, but it is what it is. I'm willing to sacrifice football as much as I love football. I'm willing to sacrifice it for a peaceful Earth. I am, and it's same with the violent movies and TV shows. Are they tame? But basically, it almost sounds like you're describing Demolition Man, right? Like the Demolition Man like scenario. And here's the thing: if you eliminate the Raymond Cocteau situation, right? Like if you're and basically, I don't think that's what you mean. Like, I don't think you're intimating anything nefarious when you say the internet is only allowed for use for the government and libraries. I think you're just trying to get rid of social media. I think that's your whole motivation for that. You're just saying there's no Twitter, there's no Facebook, there's no Threads or Instagram or anything like that. And yeah, I'll take the blue pill. I will. I would take the blue pill. I don't need any more fast food. I should stop eating fast food. I've probably taken years off of my life with all the fast food that I've eaten. I hope not. Maybe I can reverse it if I, start making some more healthier choices. And I love meat, but again, like if there is no meat, I mean, I'll find something else to eat. It's not like meat is my most favorite food. I like cereal. I enjoy other things outside of red meat in that regard. So yeah, blue pill, dude. Blue pill. I will take blue pill all the way. Less death, don't have to leave the planet, more peaceful. All those assassinations you said never happened. Yeah, no, blue pill. Absolutely. I would take blue pill hands down for sure. So I think that's a clear answer there. Number 4. All right, how about this? Here is another concept I'd like to revisit, he says. In the past, I've talked about shows and movies where there's things that happened that I didn't like and what I could have done that would have made it better. I figure this could be my own weekly catch up going forward, talking about shows or films where they did something I didn't like and how I would have it better to watch. I'll just have to make sure you've seen it. He says, so one of my least favorite episodes of The Simpsons is My Sister, My Sitter. I think I've seen this one. Yes, I do think I've seen this episode. This is the one where, here, just before I read on, I just want to Google this. My sister, come on, learn how to type, man. My sister, my sitter. Let's see. Yep, season. Oh, okay, season 8. Yep, yep. I've seen this. This is the one where Lisa is that she's babysitting all over town, and like Homer and Marge decided it would be a good idea for her to babysit Bart and Maggie, and yeah, of course, Bart makes her life a living hell. Yes, okay, I got that. But he says spoiler warning to this 1997 episode. Yes, this is over 30. This is like 30 years old, but either way. John says, I've spoken to people about this episode, and the justification that they give me toward Lisa being Bart's babysitter is she is smart and mature. She is, he says, but I always hated when I was a teen whenever my younger brother got control of the house and making me feel like he was babysitting me just because I was on the spectrum. Even though my parents never explicitly say that was the case, they didn't have the best subtlety to say otherwise. Yes, I understand she proved herself by watching other kids, including those older than Bart, but the family should know the type of person Bart is at this point. They should know how manipulative, cunning, and rebellious Bart is as a character, or rather, the writers should have known better. Okay, I will address all of that in a second here, but let me continue on with respect to your thoughts, John. You said, here's how I would have made the episode better without making serious changes. He says, Bart objects to his younger sister supervising him and Maggie. Marge compromises and says he can be Lisa's assistant, but he won't get paid, which Bart begrudgingly accepts. He starts to disobey Lisa's orders, and Lisa, fed up with his mutiny, starts acting like his babysitter, telling him to go to bed, which Bart still acts passive-aggressive about, and the plot moves forward. At the very least, Bart doesn't feel as humiliated. I haven't been able to rewatch the episode. What do you think? Do you remember the episode, he asks. Do you see my changes as better, or do you perhaps have some changes? And how would you feel if any of your younger siblings, despite IQ level, had authority on you? Oh, and yeah, I know Bart's an idiot, but you know who else is an idiotic older brother? Eddie Winslow. Yeah, he screwed up watching Laura and Judy, but Carl and Harriet still left him in charge initially. Okay. John, I sense that this is definitely a personal and sore subject for you. As far as you being on the spectrum, I think there are plenty of people out there that are, on some level on the spectrum. Maybe even myself. I mean, I've never been diagnosed, so I can't make that claim of like specifically. But I will say this with respect to your thoughts on the episode. First, I want to address like what you were saying, your criticism of the episode, because you compare the situation with Bart and Lisa to your own situation with respect to it. The thing is, Bart is not on the spectrum. right? Like that, I don't think it's not an apples to apples comparison. Like Bart's an asshole. Bart is a troublemaker, and in a number of episodes, it has been determined that Bart is evil. Right? He has his good morals here and there, right? Like in certain episodes, but he's evil, right? So that's the idea of this is he's not being reprimanded, you know, by Homer and Lisa because, or by Homer and Marge rather, because Lisa's younger. It's because Lisa, as you said, is smart and more mature than him and has proven at this point. Like the idea is that Bart is not mature enough to be the babysitter, right? And he's only 2 years older than her, right? So that's supposed to be the whole point of the dichotomy. And of course, the thing I'm going to tell you, John, is you don't have an episode unless it goes the way that it did, right? Like the whole point is that Bart is supposed to feel humiliated. Bart is supposed to feel the way that he does because he's supposed to lash out. He's supposed to make things difficult for Lisa, and he's supposed to be the asshole older brother to her. That's the entire point because that's The Simpsons. That's literally the structure of the show, right? There were definitely times where The Simpsons had heart and morals and different messages, and then there were times where they would just do shit like this, which is completely in character with everybody. Nobody was out of character in that episode, and that is an episode like the first 10 seasons of The Simpsons. Ask most people that watch that show; those are like the best seasons of the show. Those are the seasons that I watched live, when they aired on WKBD 50 in Detroit, growing up. And I have definitely seen that episode, among others, in that 10-year span a lot more than many others after that. So this is an episode I'm very familiar with. And yeah, I obviously I would not change anything, personally, because I never looked at it that way. I always looked at it as Bart was the jerk, because Bart is a jerk, right? And that, again, whether I don't think the intent of his character was not that he was on the spectrum. The intent of his character is that he's an asshole, and that Lisa is more mature, more rational, and more intelligent than him most of the time. And him lashing out his immaturity is it's not just his rebellion, right? And I what did you say? Like they should know how manipulative, cunning, and rebellious Bart is as a character, or rather, the writers should have known better. No, the writers did their job, John. I have to disagree with you on this because that's how Bart's character was intended to be from the beginning. That episode does not betray any of the Simpsons character like behaviors or motivations or evolution to that point. Everyone is acting exactly the way their characters are supposed to be acting with respect to how they've been designed. So there's nothing. I don't think the writers should have known better. I think the writers did exactly what they were supposed to do because that was the point of the episode in that regard. And this is where you don't have to like it, John, right? It's all subjective, but the writers did what they were supposed to do. So no, I would not make any changes whatsoever. And if you want to make your changes, that's cool. But I do think that a lot of the humor in the situation, especially with the case of Bart bumping his head, and him getting injured, what was it? His arm was out of place, and Lisa had him in the wheelbarrow, and and Maggie got locked in the dog crate, right? Like all of that humor is lost with any of these changes, right? And that's the whole point of it is that Lisa is under the pressure of trying to be a responsible babysitter, does overstep her bounds at times, and does get a little arrogant with Bart. And that's where the whole sibling rivalry stuff comes into play, which again does not betray any of their characters. So I think that absolutely just I think it fits. I think the episode works. I would not change anything personally, but that's just my opinion. That's just my own subjective opinion with respect to that. And yeah, Eddie Winslow was absolutely an idiot. Yeah, I mean, but Eddie was the older brother. I mean, I don't know. I really do feel like there's some personal animosity there with respect to your personal life, John, with respect to your sibling relationships, and that's why you feel as strongly as you do about that episode and those characters. And I get it. I mean, I understand that. Again, it is all subjective. I just think that the episode, quite honestly, is fine the way that it is. I don't have any qualms with it. Is it one of my favorite episodes? No, but I mean, there's certainly other episodes of The Simpsons that I find funnier, but I don't think that episode betrays anything with respect to the writing or the character design of anyone on that show. That's just my own personal opinion on that. So, but that's an interesting scenario. The idea of presenting episodes that you don't necessarily care for that you would like to have seen done differently. All right, fair enough. Let's see. So that's your first email. Your second email You titled this as "I had to share this. Up to you if you want to acknowledge it on the show." And what he sent everybody is he sent what appears to be a meme. It's a stick figure meme of, let's see, one person sitting on a chair with three other people sitting on a couch, and then there's another person standing behind the person in the chair, and he's the one that is talking. And it looks like they're watching Superman. And when I say Superman, I'm talking about the Superman movie due out on July 11th, because it's the picture of Superman and Krypto staring at the Earth. And the person standing and behind the four people watching is like, "Is this the new Superman movie? Why aren't you watching Man of Steel?" And then in the second image, they ignore him. And he goes, "This movie has a dog in it, right? Didn't you hear me? He wears red trunks." And then third part of it, where Krypto is dragging him along, he says, "Quit having fun, Henry Cavill, Henry Cavill, Henry Cavill." Okay. I don't know Facebook is where you found this meme? Okay. So clearly this meme is anti-Snyder, right? And even more so, this meme is meant for like the Snyder cultists, right? Which, granted, this probably does accurately describe the Snyder cultists. Here's the thing. I mean, I'll acknowledge it because I'm obviously not that person screaming, and I don't think you're that person screaming, John. I think we're the people watching on the couch. We're the people ignoring the cultists because at least that's what you should be doing, right? I'm ignoring the cultists, right? July 11th, I will be front and center in a movie theater watching Superman, right? I that's already planned, okay? Open mindedness and whatnot, and of course, I love Man of Steel. I own it. Inglorious 4K Steelbook. So, yeah, I'll acknowledge the meme to say that I'm, either the one controlling the remote, ignoring the cultist, or I'm one of the three sitting on the couch, also ignoring the cultist. Yeah, the cultists can, go to hell. Seriously, at this point. Not interested in any of their bullshit. And if you reverse this and it was, an anti-Snyder cultist watching Man of Steel and it was the same thing and they just said Christopher Reeve, Christopher Reeve, Christopher Reeve at the end of it, yeah, same thing. Ignore those bitches too. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned. I hate both sides of the cult. Let me get to your last email here because you did provide some quick thoughts on Thunderbolts, and spoiler-filled conversation is free and clear here since I've seen it. My review, as of the time of me releasing this episode, has not been put out yet, but here. You had some quick thoughts on Thunderbolts. You said, "I think the film as a whole works and it is a good movie. But I'm going to be honest, this should have come out sooner. If the dates for Brave New World and Thunderbolts switched, I think Brave New World would have been seen in a different light and would have been built up from the momentum of Thunderbolts. I can't say it's my favorite of Phase 4 and 5, but it's upper mid-tier, maybe tied with Guardians Volume 3. Shang-Chi is still the best film of these two phases, not involving Spider-Man or X-Men, but that's more based on an enjoyment level than taking into account the stories of those two." Okay, so now I think I get why you made the comparison to Shang-Chi. You said that you liked it better because you're looking at movies in Phase 4 and 5. Okay, now that makes more sense. I thought that was a really weird comparison one-to-one that you were making on Threads when you said that, because watching Thunderbolts, the first Marvel movie I think of is not Shang-Chi in that regard, right? And not until I went into my rankings. And yeah, I have figured out where I'm going to rank this. I will leave that to the episode of FLITE review that I post tomorrow, but I will say this. You are being significantly harsher than I am to the Thunderbolts film. And I don't agree about moving the dates between Brave New World and Thunderbolts because it's also clear to me, based on a line of dialogue, actually a couple of lines of dialogue early on in the film, that Thunderbolts was meant to take place after Brave New World because it references at least one or two events that happen in Brave New World, truthfully. So, yeah, I don't think that works with respect to that. I think Brave New World was always meant to come out first and then Thunderbolts second. And no, I don't think Thunderbolts would have helped Brave New World's perception. I really don't. You're looking at it from a marketing standpoint where you're saying, well, if Thunderbolts had come out first, people would have liked it better and Marvel would have gotten a better, launch out of the gate for this particular year. I disagree with that because I think that Brave New World was always looked at as Sam Wilson Captain America and how people were going to judge it based on that. And even I, going into it, was looking at it like, okay, well, based on what we're seeing in the marketing, it has the potential to be on the level of Winter Soldier, but I'm not necessarily expecting Winter Soldier. I think people were looking at it that way, and they were also looking at how Giancarlo Esposito was going to be used in the film, how we were going to get to the Red Hulk stuff, what Tim Blake Nelson's leader was going to be like, right? All those things, were things that people were taking into account going into the film, and I don't think releasing Thunderbolts earlier would have helped that or changed that at all. I really don't. I honestly don't believe that Thunderbolts would have propelled momentum. If that were the case, if that was how it worked, then I don't know why Guardians Volume 3 wouldn't have given the Marvels momentum for later in the year back in 2023. And we know that did not happen because Quantumania bombed at the beginning of the year, and then Guardians Volume 3 did well in the middle of the year, like around this time, May, and then later on in November, the Marvels tanked, right? Like, did not do well. So I don't think that, as far as momentum is concerned, I don't think that works. Also, I will say this as well, John. The post-credit scene, specifically the end credit scene, doesn't work. Is not as effective in Thunderbolts if you put it before Brave New World. Like, not at all. And I'll talk about that again in Flight Review. I definitely have my thoughts. But, as far as where Thunderbolts ranks with respect to Phase 3 or respect to Phase 4 and 5 films, I will at least tell you that I do agree that I would put Shang-Chi ahead of it. But I will get into where Thunderbolts falls in relation to that and the rest of the MCU in my Flight Review episode. I will say that with respect to that. But at least you think the film as a whole works, and it is a good movie. I think much more highly of it, but I will talk about why in Flight Review anyway. But thank you, as always, for your feedback, John. I'm looking forward to more of your hypotheticals and what your thoughts are with respect to my thoughts on Thunderbolts after tomorrow. Speaking of Thunderbolts, Stuart Little checks in this week, and the title of his email is literally Jake Schreier is the Blueprint, and that's the director of Thunderbolts. So we know what he's going to be talking about here, but first and foremost, he's got to talk about Andor Week 2. And also, just to clarify, I did post this on like all socials. Flightbox is taking a hiatus from Andor with respect to the season 2 because I can't do 3 episodes and an episode recording like right after that every week. I just can't do that. It's very taxing on my schedule and my commute, right? I don't work close to where I live. I have a long commute back and forth every day, after an 8-hour day, and there's not enough time, guys. I'm sorry. Like, it's 2.5 hours, that I've got to watch. It'd be one thing if it was one episode. One episode of Andor, just like with Daredevil, it was easier with Daredevil. It was one episode, or in a couple of cases, 2 episodes. And it still wasn't like 2.5 hours, right? There was enough time for me to record an episode and potentially get to bed on time. I just can't do it with Andor. I can't. So, unfortunately, that's why there was no episode of Flightbox this week, and there won't be one until Andor has concluded. Andor Season 2 has concluded, the show itself, and then I will do a recap episode of all of it with respect to that. So just want to throw that out there before we dive into Stu Little's Andor Week 2 spoilers. All right, spoiler warning, because I said the spoiler conversation is still free and clear because I did still watch the episodes. I am still caught up. So here we go. Stu says, another great set of episodes as we get to see Gorman from the ground up, and to our surprise find that it's Star Wars, French Resistance style, including berets and everything. I'm sure there's people who are saying it breaks immersion that people are speaking actual French in this, but Star Wars' main human language in this ancient outer space setting, basic, is literally English. So shut up, putains. Did I pronounce that? I don't know if that was exactly how that word is. And they were speaking actual French. That was French. I mean, it definitely sounded like a French accent, but I didn't know if it was like, if they made Gormian or whatnot, whichever. Absolutely French. Yeah, the French influence was most certainly there. It did not bother me because I just chalked it up as, well, in the galaxy, there's going to be variants and offshoots a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away of like languages and cultures that we have now. So that's how I've always thought of Star Wars. So it certainly didn't bother me. But either way, Stu says, we once again seeing Cassian doing undercover work and also show how far he's come as he schools the locals on what they're doing wrong and the friction it creates with Luthen, who seems to be getting a bit more reckless in response to encroaching threats. Shout out to them casting German actor Richard Sammel as Gorman Resistance leader Carol Rylance. Thank you for bringing this up, Stu. I was going to mention this. He says it's wonderful against type thinking to give that role to an actor best known in the West for playing Nazis. be it the Vampire one in Eichhorst, being the Vampire one Eichhorst in The Strain, or the Sergeant who Donnie Donowitz gets some batting practice with in Inglourious Bastards, and he does good work playing this character who is so mature but also so inexperienced in what he wants to do. I didn't know his name. Thank you, Stu, for his name, his real name, Richard Sammel, but I knew him from Inglourious Bastards. Absolutely, I knew him. And I thought the exact same thing. I said, this is a great 180 juxtaposition. The fact that this dude was a Nazi, and literally the Nazi that said, F you and your Jew dogs, right? I'm quoting him out of Inglourious Bastards. That's how horrible of a character he was in that movie for like 5 minutes, and that's why you want to see Donnie Donowitz, played by actor-director Eli Roth, beat him to death with a baseball bat, right? He has absolutely been like a facsimile of a real-life oppressor, and now he is playing the leader of a group that is oppressed by space Nazis in Star Wars. It is awesome. What did you call it? Wonderful against type thinking. Yes, I do love that. I did not know he had played other Nazis in that regard. That's probably why, more than likely, Tarantino cast him in Inglourious Basterds. But no, thank you for bringing that up. That was definitely something I wanted to touch on for sure, talking about this. He said, I'm glad Bix's arc has finally seemed to get her into a more proactive place beyond still dealing with her torture trauma. 6 episodes maybe might seem like much, but getting her to Coruscant to get payback on her abuser makes it worth it, and her being a part of the Andor-Luthen dynamic now could go many ways. The Cyril Karn plot this season hasn't gone how I expected it to, he says, and I'm not entirely sure where it'll end up. I can't tell how much he's actually starting to question his commitment to the Empire, with how he's a bit upset that Dedra had him followed by ISB, but I also note that he still hasn't crossed paths with Cassian so far this season, and that could be something that just reinforces his zealousness all over again. Yeah, they almost crossed paths. That was literally, they just missed each other. He left Gorman at the same time Cassian went to Gorman, and then vice versa. So it's interesting how they decided to just narrowly miss them. Otherwise, the dramatic irony of what's going on behind the scenes in both cases would be completely lost. Like it wouldn't work out in that regard. You know how I feel about dramatic irony, but at least people aren't so stupid with respect to this particular bit of dramatic irony. But Stu says Mon Mothma is in more of a pure plot mode this batch of episodes, as she's doing the work and not being so questioning about what it takes. I guess the wedding rave worked a lot of that out of her system, but you still get to see her fiery idealism trying to convince her fellow senators to unite, her disgust at their capitulation, and the awesome scene of her sparring with Krennic. Yeah, that was cool. I did like that. He says, I was momentarily taken aback at the Bail Organa recasting, but Bratt did well. Yeah, I'll touch on that for real briefly. I don't have an issue with the Benjamin Bratt recasting in that regard. I will say that after I found out about it beforehand, because I knew that a recasting had occurred, and I figured it was Bale, for whatever reason. Either Jimmy Smits didn't want to do it, or I guess what it was they couldn't line up the schedules, right? So they get Bratt to do it. And then I watched the episode, and I'm like, well, that really wasn't that important of a role. Did that have to be Bail Organa? But I've heard that apparently he resurfaces in the last 6 episodes again in a more important role. So okay, if Bail was meant to be in that scene and he's also meant to pop up elsewhere in the show, then yes, I get why you would do a recast as opposed to just making it another senator. I get that. I do understand that. I don't have any issues with it because Jimmy Smits is Bail in Rogue One, and it's not like he's replacing Jimmy Smits, right? Benjamin Bratt is not replacing him. I mean, they're like 8 years apart in age, but you kept it a Latino actor, right? You kept that going. And the way Bratt plays it, I mean, he's not playing it like all that differently. I mean, obviously his delivery is different, his speech is different than Jimmy Smits, but he's not playing the character all that differently than how Smits played, at least for the little bit that we've seen him. So we'll just have to wait and see exactly how the rest of it goes. But I have no issues with the recast. And it's better, to me, hopefully it signifies that Star Wars and Lucasfilm are, amenable to recasting at this point, because I've always felt like since Solo, since that didn't work out for them, they've really been skittish about recasting, and that's when they went into this whole idea. I mean, they went back to what they did in Rogue One, where basically they got an actor stand-in and superimposed Luke Skywalker or another character's face over that person, just like they did with Tarkin, right, in Rogue One, and do the re-speech and create lines of dialogue and do everything to digitally recreate the person. Like, if they could just get away from that ridiculousness. Even as much as I enjoyed what they did with Tarkin in Rogue One, it shouldn't be the standard. It shouldn't be what you do all the damn time. Recasting should occur. The Tarkin thing, and even if they had done that with Tarkin, they just found somebody that looked like Peter Cushing or looked like Tarkin, right? And did the hair and all that and gave him the delivery. Like, they could have done that. I would have been perfectly okay with that, right? Like, recastings in those situations don't bother me. The only time recastings bother me is when there is a progression of films and you change an actor in the middle and like you lose the emotional weight that you gain from, connecting with the first actor, like between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, right? The reason that Rachel Dawes' death doesn't have as much impact in The Dark Knight is because it's Maggie Gyllenhaal instead of Katie Holmes, who you spent all of Batman Begins getting to know emotionally as an audience member in that regard, right? And seeing the connection between her and Bruce. I think that, unfortunately, that's the type of recasting that I don't care for. That's not what this is. Like I said, Jimmy Smits is not being replaced. He's just temporarily Benjamin Bratt is temporarily standing in for his character, but it's the same character. I'm good with that. I'm perfectly fine with that. I agree with you. Bratt did do well. So Stu says there was also some Saw Gerrera stuff, which, yeah, we always knew this guy was unstable, but huffing Starship fuel fumes? Now I'm thinking back to how he had a respirator in Rogue One and questioning what he was inhaling from it. I hope he'd sent Jin away before this point. Well, either that or the radonium is why he has to huff oxygen because it screwed up his lungs. I look at it that way. Maybe that's why he's on a respirator. So hopefully Wilmon, who I don't know will survive this show, hopefully he'll be okay. But he also says mixed feelings on the death of Cinta. On the one hand, establishing the first confirmed same-sex relationship in Star Wars with actual substance to it, only to then have one of them die, does seem a bit of bury your gays trope instance. I would have called it fridging, but okay, Stu, we're going there with the terminology. This is what Stu said. He says, but on the other hand, should being gay give a character plot armor in a story about people who are literally willing to lay their lives down for a greater cause, especially when the sort of conflict we're talking about has real-life parallels where there are too many of such minorities who are martyrs or victims in it? So many characters in the show have confirmed or assumed future deaths, including its titular lead, after all. We could also take issue with Cinta's death not being epi or useful, but being a totally avoidable accident by an incompetent rookie. But perhaps there's intended meaning in that an ally is not always being helpful. Overall, still some great stuff though. Yeah, the gay thing, the lesbian thing never crossed my mind because I'm just not thinking about that. I'm beyond that. I don't give a shit about them having a lesbian relationship because I accept that 1000%, and I don't realize that never occurred to me that they were fridging Cinta for that reason, Stu. I'm not quite that cynical, I don't think. But the latter part, though, I do think her death. I'm 50-50 on her death because I get what they were doing. I get the point of it. I get the importance of exactly what you were saying. The idea that allies are not always being helpful. They gave us plenty of red herrings, right? Because Vel gives the warning, nobody has guns, nobody has blasters but us. And of course, when the one woman, who was resisting them along with the other guy, when she runs off to help the older lady that almost wanders into it, you're like, okay, well, that's where it's going to go right. You expected whatever was going to happen on Gorman to go wrong in some form, right? Someone was going to die. Something bad was going to happen, right? And so, like, they gave you the red herring. You thought it was going to be her, and then you thought it was going to be the guy that stumbled into it, the big guy that was yelling at the meeting, that was barreled through and tried to muscle his way into it. And no, it turns out that, other dude that was resisting things and didn't like being given orders, an errant shot where he was meaning to shoot his buddy or at least fire in the air ends up killing Cinta. I think that's a weak death. I think I would almost compare it to Tasha Yar, right? An empty death, a death, in my opinion, without purpose. Even though I get the purpose, I understand what the purpose was of Cinta dying in that regard. I just don't think it was the strongest way they could have done it, personally. That's just my own subjective opinion. It's the only reason I'm 50-50 on it and not 100% with it. I feel like there was another way that they could have done that. And again, the whole gay thing did not even cross my mind. Like, not once did I think that was why Cinta was killed off. I mean, I'm sure plenty of cynical people probably do feel that way, but I did not think of that. I just thought it was a weak way to kill her off in that regard. So yeah, it is what it is. So it was their choice, and I remain 50-50 on it. It's probably the weakest part of this 3-episode arc, I would say, truthfully. Which, by the way, I did want to point this out as well. It was pointed out to me by my coworker, Craig, who I've mentioned before, that is a huge Star Wars fan, that apparently there's a year in between each of these 3 episode arcs. Because that threw me off for a second. I'm like, has a year passed since since they flew off that planet and got away from the dude that tried to rape her? And it's like, yes, apparently a year has passed. There is a year in between each of these. So apparently the next 3 episode arc we're going to watch next week is a year after this one that we just watched. Apparently, at least that's allegedly this was said at Celebrations, like in this regard, right? And here, let me see if I can confirm that personally before somebody debunks this or says yes. Yeah, I've got the Screen Rant article here. Tony Gilroy talking about. He says, so when we come back for our second half, it'll be a year later. An entire year will have gone on. All kinds of things will have happened, and we'll pick up the show. Sometimes we'll do a week, we'll do 3 days, we'll do 4 days, whatever, and then we'll drop a year in between. Okay, so yeah. So whatever happens, yeah, and that was kind of what threw me off at first, because I'm like, Andor and Cassie and Bix didn't do a whole lot in that last episode, and then at the very end, that happens where she kills the doctor. They blow the building up. They blow up the floor, and I'm like, okay, now what's going to happen from that? But we're not going to see the immediate ramifications of that because we're going to jump a year after that happened for next week. So that was something I didn't know because I haven't read all the inside baseball with respect to Andor season 2. And apparently this was published like a couple years ago, and I haven't paid attention to that. So either way, the time jump thing, I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't have any issues with it. Just as far as like expectations, now my brain is trying to think of, okay, what will be the ramifications of what happened now a year later? Like, where are we going to find ourselves? Where are these characters going to find themselves? And you'd think The Last Jedi would have taught me not to do that with respect to trying to predict what's going to happen in Star Wars. But yeah, foolishly, I'm probably going to try to either way. But it was another solid week for Andor. I think probably my favorite storyline still remains the Mon Mothma stuff, truthfully, with respect to what was going on, especially the tension of trying to get that listening device off of that piece of art. Yeah, that was when the blood started trickling down her hand. I was like, oh, wow, this is that. And plus that, amidst the backdrop of Mon arguing with Krennic, which that was delicious. That was fantastic. So yeah, definitely enjoyed that part of it. But yeah, Andor so far, season 2 has been fantastic. We're halfway through. And so we move on to the Thunderbolts portion of Stu's email where he says it's the best MCU movie he's seen since Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. He says, yes, I like Deadpool and Wolverine a lot, but I guess I consider that more of a Foxverse project than a Marvel Studios joint. That's semantics, technicality, but either way, I get where you're coming from with that, Stu. Let's get into your spoilers. Here we go. Spoiler warning for Thunderbolts. Yes, he's going to talk spoilers. I'm going to try, again, I'm going to try and save a lot of my thoughts for the FLITE review, but either way, let's get into what Stu has to say here. All right. Thunderbolt spoilers. Thunderbolt spoilers is your warning for Thunderbolt spoilers. All right, here we go. He says, we got a visually interesting, more practically done, they blew up that skyscraper level for real, character-driven action movie about the importance of good mental health and friends and family. While there is definitely some of what I call the Marvel tax of humor and not strictly needed interconnectivity that you have to take for the good stuff, said good stuff is worth it, I guess, and the humor is largely funny and built from the dynamics, he says. But there's also heavy stuff in there. Domestic abuse, drug addiction, lots of traumatic child stuff. I don't think Marvel has gone this dark before in terms of themes in a major theatrical release. Speaking of dark, he says, the light shadows motif throughout the film was very cool and appropriate, and I particularly like the overhead long shot of Yelena's corridor fight in the opening sequence, where the shadows of her and her opponents create that contrast. All right, you're getting into the nitty-gritty of it, I see. Very analytical of you, Stu. Not surprised. He says, Yelena as a main protagonist is perfect, and Florence Pugh delivers the weary snark and ennui of the character to a T, and you can see a different take on how Black Widow was voice of reason and often most wise person in the original Avengers. Yelena is embodying this in a bit more of a still developing and youthful way. He says Bucky really gets a bit of a glow up here compared to more recent outings. I felt he was a little underserved in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, despite being one half of the title characters. No, I didn't think he needed to be positioned as the main protagonist like Sam was, but I did want the storyline that they set up for him to have more of a substantial ending than it got, with us not even seeing the conversation he had with the guy whose son he killed. Here, Bucky's struggling to be a different sort of hero, he says, but he slides right into being the adult in the Thunderbolts really well and helps them be more cohesive by giving them a chance to do something good. Stu then says, I've made peace now with how goofy Red Guardian is. I had hoped that if we saw him after Black Widow, he'd be a bit more serious like he was shown pre-prison in that film. But when What If recently depicted even the young version of him as being like that, I knew that wasn't going to be. But he is genuinely hilarious in this, Stu says, and his constant belief in Yelena and inspiring speech to her near the end is very wholesome. I do think it strains credulity, though, that they play the character as such a joke that Valentina, who knows Yelena very well, hasn't even heard of him, a Russian super soldier, to the extent that somehow he's able to just become her limo driver and overhear some very delicate plans. I think that more over speaks to Valentina's, one, overconfidence, and two, her assholishness, because she definitely has that streak in her, and you see more of that of her in this particular film than you have in her previous outings. Obviously, this is the most that we've seen of Julia Louis-Dreyfus as Valentina Allegra de Fontaine. But either way, yeah, that's what I would chalk that up to personally. He says John Walker's interesting, as they handle the douchey alpha male tendencies of the character with enough restraint to keep him sympathetic when they need to, and add an overall aspect of the plot is everyone there has something to bring. They just need to get out of each other's way to do it, he says, and this is typified by him constantly trying to take charge and call the shots. He says Ava Ghost was the character I had the least investment for going in, as Ant-Man and the Wasp is a fairly forgettable MCU entry to me, but she's put to good use here, albeit in a bit more secondary of a manner than some of the other team members, as I kind of view her main contribution as being British snark and how cool they made her powers work in action sequences. I will respectfully disagree with most of what you just wrote. I will explain why with respect to Ava and Ghost, and why she was one of the characters I was looking forward to the most, and whether or not I was satisfied with what they did with her in Flight Review. So stay tuned for that, Stu. He says, I really like Lewis Pullman's role as Bob/Sentry/The Void in this. He manages to pull off the range needed for all these versions of the same guy, and also the dual role of being the movie's big bad and arguably its secondary protagonist. The fact that he gets a chance to redeem himself and carry on is appreciated too, as I could have imagined a version of this where at his best, Bob had to sacrifice himself to stop the Void somehow, but the fact that he overcame the weight of that, and he's now kind of the Hulk of the new Avengers, if you think about it, including an actually developed and sensical bond with the Black Widow, is cool. When he first showed up as Sentry with the blonde hair, the Homelander vibes are unavoidable, and the film did amazingly well at depicting how insanely powerful he was. Comic Sentry once ripped the God of War Ares open like a plastic bag of mincemeat, he says. The Void is genuinely terrifying and creepy, and the pure shadow look, while basic, is very effective. Looking like he's turning people into burn marks was genuinely jarring, but the fact that he was absorbing them into a trauma pocket dimension is even worse. Sorry, Mayor Fisk, you're going to be when I was a boying for a good while more after this, he says. Taskmaster was in this movie for like 2 minutes, he says. Yeah, this is really the one major failing for me. I wasn't crazy about the route they went with Taskmaster and Black Widow, but I thought here was various opportunities in this movie for the character. I particularly wanted some interaction with Bucky given how much in common the two have. Barring that, some kinship with Yelena given the history. Yelena does speak on her life a bit after she's killed, but so much more could have been done with that given Tony/Taskmaster is part of Natasha's legacy, good and bad. I think there's 2 reasons why she was done that way, Stu. Again, I'll get to more of it in Flight Review. Don't worry. I will respond to all of this. I have thoughts on all of this. I'm just going to save most of it for the review because I want to go in depth further with that in the review. But I will briefly tell you, though, that the Taskmaster being like getting offed that quickly did not bother me whatsoever, especially when I saw how the rest of the movie was going, and it became pretty clear to me why Taskmaster was being taken out that quickly. I think there was definitely a reason in universe and also out of universe that happened. Again, Flight Review. I will talk about it. He says, our actual main villain, Valentina, is mostly a good foil, and the moral flexibility she embodies and endorses to her subordinate Mel makes her a pretty unlikable person, to the extent that I'm actually a little pissed she mostly gets away with what she did. But you know, Bob could get those memories back any time, and the Void could come back, so we'll see, he says. I was also surprised at how low-key Snyderverse/Snyder Cut coded I found the film to be with a bunch of specific instances. And here's his list. He says, An elected official tries to get to the bottom of shady goings on to create a super being that ends up being an existential threat. Check. Well, yeah, Valentina is basically like Waller Light. And I do mean Waller Light not because Waller's black and Valentina's white. No, it's not racial at all. It's just that Valentina is not nearly as bold or as confident as Waller. Okay, I think we can all say that. And look, we're not comparing actresses here. I mean, all due respect to Julia Louis-Dreyfus, there is no comparison to Viola Davis as far as I'm concerned with respect to that. But yeah, that's where like the Suicide Squad stuff came into play for me, right? Like as far as the comparison that I was making between this and that. So yeah, I got you on that. Check. He says most powerful character in the movie is attacked by the rest of the team and handles them with embarrassing ease. Check. Yep, that's Snyder cut, right? Zack Snyder's Justice League. Yes. An automobile goes slipping toward a bystander only for a cyborg to jump in the way and redirect it. Check. Yep, technically that is true. A climax where a character resolves the threat by realizing he's not alone. Check. Yeah, actually, I thought of that scene when that happened in the movie, to be honest with you, Stu. I did think of that. The cast organized in an image that's an homage to the iconic Bohemian Rhapsody picture. Check. Yep. David Harbour. Check. We count the first Suicide Squad as Snyderverse, don't we? Yes, we do. It's part of it. The beginnings of the DCU, that $3 billion mark. Yes. A scene where they disguise themselves as military personnel and have an awkward encounter when security stops them. Check. Yep, okay. Black Perry White actor. Check. Okay, Stu, you're really not pulling any punches with the socio-political stuff in this particular email, but yeah, that is Wendell Pierce, who we will see later as Perry White. I prefer to think of it as this. Yes, I know that, Perry White is black, essentially now because Lawrence Fishburne was Perry White in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And yes, I'm glad that Perry White is black again, Wendell Pierce playing him in Superman. But I look at it this way. I mean, I hear what you're saying about Snyder coding, but the bigger thing to me, and I'm definitely going to bring this up in Flight Review tomorrow and also later when we get to Superman later this year, I'm going to bring up it for anybody out there that still believes that actors can only do one franchise or the other, one more time. Bullshit. Hollywood does not tribalize. Hollywood sees superheroes as one genre. So Wendell Pierce played a significant role as a Senate committee member in Thunderbolts, and in a couple of months, he will be Perry White in Superman in the DCU. Bang. And I think it's also hilarious that with respect to the other black Perry White actor, well, he was Perry White, Lawrence Fishburne, as I said, in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and then he was Goliath in what Stu considers the mostly forgettable Ant-Man and the Wasp. Which is one of the things I disagree with him on, but either way, so yeah, and there are other actors that have been in both franchises. So yeah, I'm totally gonna use Wendell Pierce as another example to say that tribalism is bullshit. But either way, continuing on with the rest of Stu's list, he's got a couple more here. He says children being killed. Oh wait, that never happened on screen in the so-called Murderverse. My bad. Okay, Stu, flag. It didn't happen here either. I thought it did. I absolutely thought the child got killed. You just explained earlier that how and why she wasn't killed. So no, children not killed. Unless you're talking about, no wait, he's going to get me in a technicality here because he's going to talk about the Elena scene earlier. Well, that wasn't on screen either. Truthfully, you can't show that on screen, obviously, in one of these that wouldn't test well with test audiences. We heard it and it was implied off screen, Stu. We did not see it actually happen. Not that I can recall. I just saw the movie a couple of hours ago. Yes, it did happen. That one, the earlier one, the flashback one, not the void one. But anyway, either way, no, that did not happen on screen in the so-called Murderverse or off screen, I don't think, truthfully. He says, I could go on. Jake Schreier even sounds like the name you'd give a fictional director based on Zack Snyder in a movie or TV show, but you get the idea. Expect some obnoxious comparisons by Snyder cultists online, and equally obnoxious why this worked when Marvel did it but not when DCEU did it takes from Snyder antis. Yeah, I've already seen, and I did not respond to this because, okay, so on Reddit, I don't know why, like, it's still showing me shit from that Snyder cult group that the sub that I was a part of, but they're already saying that Marvel has introduced its version of Superman and he's awesome. And it's like, okay, we're not even gonna, the Sentry, of course, is who they're saying that's the case. It's like, no, we're leaving that where it is. The cultists, no, moving on in that regard. And yeah, you're right, the antis are probably gonna say some shit like that too. He says, I'm very pleased with this movie, and I think it does feel very cohesive and like it was maybe allowed to be what it was from the outset. Though I can't imagine maybe some stuff being cut out like the rest of the team's experiences in The Void. If there is stuff like that, I'd like to see it. Hashtag release the Schreier cut. Take care, Stu. Okay, Stu, you've gone too far. No, strike that from the record. Screw that. I mean, that's your opinion. It's all subjective in that regard, but I will talk about in Flight Review, as I've said 1,000 times already, why there doesn't need to be a Schreier cut. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, by the way. And why, in my opinion, if anything was cut out of it, it wasn't that stuff. I think if there was anything cut out of the movie, it was more than likely the stuff with respect to Valentina and her assistant, because there were some edits in that part of the movie that I thought were a little fast. And some ADR usage that I thought was kind of obvious, to be honest with you. So I think that's the stuff that got cut out. And I don't need more of that. More of the team stuff would be cool. But we got a good amount of team stuff. But again, I will get into this in Flight Review. Part of me wonders if I should have just recorded that and released that first before diving into this email. But don't worry, like I said, I will address just about everything that you said with Thunderbolts with my own thoughts in the next Flight Review episode that I will drop after this one. So stay tuned for that, Stu. And thank you for your thoughts and subjective insight as well. All right, next up, Alex De Silva, his email this week titled Friday Flight Number 1. And there's a reason he titled it that. He says, Hey, Ray, the old email thread I submitted my listener feedback and got way too laggy because of its sheer size. That email thread goes all the way back to April or May of 2022 and contains over 100 feedback emails. I like keeping everything neat and tidy in one thread, but doing it that way does mean threads will eventually grow to immense sizes and become tough to type in. Do you have any particular preference in receiving emails individual or in email threads? I guess my preference would be individual, Alex, but I didn't have an issue with the threads. I mean, sometimes for organizational purposes, like I get that it's nice and tidy, but on my end, like I would just have to make certain, okay, is this the most recent one? Is that the most recent one? Especially in cases where there was a delay between some of the feedback shows, and I had to make certain that I was looking at the most recent version of the email that you sent. But yeah, in that regard, I guess I would prefer individual, but if you wanted to start another thread, that is your business. I do get why the old one got laggy, because yeah, you're right. That it's been a couple of years a few years worth of emails in that thread. But yeah, either way that is more like convenient for you, go ahead and send it, but my preference would be individual, I would say. You're the only one that was doing the thread, like, just throwing that out there. Everybody else was completely has been individualized in this regard, and even in the case of John, he sends like 3-4 emails like over the course of a week, at different times in that regard. So, but yeah, I would say that's my preference. But again, either way, whichever way is more comfortable for you, Alex, whichever way helps you out. So, all right, continuing. He says, looks like the Pistons are out. No, it doesn't look like it. They're objectively out. They were eliminated by the New York Knicks in 6 games last night, the night before me recording this episode. He says, for what it's worth, I was low-key hoping they would advance to the second round because that would have made for some fun Friday flight debriefs, but alas, Celtics only need to take down 3 more teams to go for the repeat. I don't think it would have been that much fun, Alex, because I would have told you you're winning in 4. And quite frankly, I hope the Celtics, rather, throw the Knicks down a flight of stairs. I've never been a Knicks fan, and now I really don't like them because I do not root for teams that beat my team. So Jalen Brunson can go to hell, and so can Karl Anthony Towns. I don't care. If Boston destroys them, I will be happy, even though I don't like the Celtics either. Historically speaking, this goes all the way back to Bird stealing the pass back in the 80s, when I was a little kid, all that shit, right? Like that rivalry still exists, Alex. I think I brought that up before. But either way, had the Pistons eliminated the Knicks, I would have told you, yeah, the Celtics are winning in 4. The Pistons are not there yet. The Pistons are a very young team. They made an incredible turnaround, 44 wins from 14 the previous year. They bypassed the entire play-in structure and went straight to the 6th seed, but they were a very young and inexperienced team, and that's why they lost to the Knicks, because as well as they played against New York for 3 quarters, they would collapse and start playing not to lose in the 4th quarter. They would tense up, they would make mistakes, turnovers. I mean, even in that last game, right? After Brunson hit that 3 with like 50 some odd seconds to go, or however long it was, like there was an opportunity. The Pistons got themselves open. Malik Beasley, who's been hitting 3s all night and set the record for 3s in the season, wide open 3 that he would have made to tie the game, and he fumbled the pass out of bounds. The Pistons are a good team, but they're not ready. They're absolutely not ready. I think what needs to happen is in the offseason, they need to get Cade Cunningham a Robin to his Batman because he can't do it all by himself. There were so many times in this series, especially in the 3 games in Detroit, where it was Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns, and that was the bulk of the Knicks scoring, and the entire rest of the roster could just help them in support. And when you have 2 stars that can do that, that really, allows you to succeed. And the Pistons don't have that. They just have Cade, and he's definitely feeling pressure to do it all himself. It's his 3rd year in the league. He knows he's the best player on the team. He was the #1 draft pick a couple years ago. And yeah, he needs help. He needs somebody that will match him night in and night out, like not just in the regular season, but also most certainly in the playoffs in that regard. Like if you had another, like a Devin Booker, or even I've heard some people suggest Zion Williamson, like because we do need somebody in the paint. We don't have a low post guy. We need somebody to get, and I realize that power forwards and tall, they just step behind the arc and try to be Steph Curry all day. I get that. But the fact of the matter is, Cade Cunningham can't be our only in the paint scorer. We got to have somebody way more consistent in the paint, whether it's power forward, stretch wing, whatever it is, right? Like, if we had somebody like that could match Cade, right, and that's our dynamic duo, then we will be a far more successful team, especially in the East, right? That would definitely benefit us in the Eastern Conference, I think, and that would make us, like, very quickly more of a contender. So I think that the Pistons should use this as a learning experience, like I said before. Learn, build those playoff calluses, learn what you got to do. Trajan Langdon, do what you got to do in the offseason to get a Devin Booker or somebody else, like I don't know that Jaden Ivey is going to be that, so I don't want to rest on the idea of, well, he was hurt this year, he'll be okay next year. No, he missed out on that experience. You got to get somebody that has some experience to balance with Cade and the rest of this roster in that regard, in my humble opinion. You do that, and you're off to the races, because I think the goal now, after having made the playoffs and being a 6th seed, the goal now is next year you need to host a playoff series, get out of the first round, right? Get incrementally better here as time goes on, right? And this is a perfect time to do it because there may be some upheaval in the East. I don't know how much longer the Celtics can keep their roster together, if I'm being honest. Maybe you can provide some insight on that, Alex, going forward in your next email. We know that there's all this talk about Giannis possibly being traded off of Milwaukee, and how real are the Cavs and the Pacers and whoever else is in the East in that regard. This may be a perfect time for the Pistons to seize the opportunity and become a stronger team and really put themselves into like competitive discussion going forward. I mean, they've proven themselves in many ways, as a team to be on the lookout for in the NBA, but how do they take that next step? How do they take that next level? What will Trajan Langdon and JB Bickerstaff, who again should be coach of the year, and that roster, how will they do? How will they move forward with this? I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, they had made it to the second round. They just would have gotten thrown down a flight of stairs by the Celtics. I have no doubt of that. Would have been over in 4 because the Celtics wouldn't have made the same mistakes that the Knicks made. The Celtics wouldn't have allowed the Pistons to hang around as much as the Knicks did in that regard. And that's also why I think the Celtics are going to throw the Knicks down a flight of stairs. At least I hope so. And it'll be the one time that I gleefully am happy about Boston beating somebody in that regard. So by all means, take the Knicks out. Go ahead. Embarrass them, please. Especially that flopping asshole Brunson. Whatever. Let's get to the rest of your non-sports conversation in the email. Alex says, I'm caught up on Andor, and before I talk about episodes 4 through 6, let me share my brief thoughts on the end of the first arc. He says, I can kind of see where people are coming from in saying there's no place for sexual assault in Star Wars, but on the other hand, this is the first major Star Wars project aimed at adults, and unfortunately this is something that happens in the real world between real people. Shining a light on this type of thing accentuates the evil of the Empire and makes for a powerful statement in how important it is for the rebels to continue doing what they're doing and taking them down. Absolutely agree with all of that, Alex. And I also agree with his next statement where you say also the argument that Darth Vader wouldn't approve of sexual assault is ludicrous. At this stage in Vader's character development, he wouldn't give a damn about what this one random Imperial officer is doing on this one random planet to this one random girl, random from Vader's perspective, not the audience. Vader wouldn't even know about this happening, so this argument just holds zero weight. Yeah, it's Star Wars theory and the other nerd MAGA assholes that have been pushing that ridiculousness. So yeah, we don't need to give that any more light, Alex. But he says if you're not caught up with Andor, just skip this paragraph. No, I'm caught up. I'm good. Again, Andor discussion is fair game, guys. I know that I'm not doing Flightbox because I can't record an episode, but I'm still watching the shows, right? I didn't watch, like, it took me like Wednesday and Thursday to watch the 3 episodes for this week. And that just may be how it goes for the week, depending on how my schedule goes. I just don't have time to record an episode in a timely fashion after watching 2.5 hours of Star Wars. But I'm going to remain caught up so that we can talk spoilers. So, Alex, feel free to talk spoilers about Andor for the next couple of weeks. It is fair game. I will be caught up. And that goes for Stu, Anthony, anybody else? Yes. Anyone that is watching Andor, we're talking spoilers, all right? So, spoiler warning. Here we go. He says, I definitely preferred this season's first arc over this one. This one wasn't quite as engaging to me, he says, and I thought it was a strange narrative choice to remove Cassian's entirely from this arc's main event, the transport robbery. One of the sentiments that some fans have is that the show shouldn't be called Andor. It should have been called Rebellion or something like that. I never quite agreed with this, he says, because the focus has always been tied to Andor in some way or another, but in this arc he really took a step back, and he didn't feel like the main character at all. Side note, if the show were called Rebellion instead of Andor, the good thing about that would be that this show wouldn't be ending this season. It could go on for as long as the writers have story ideas, but I'll end this paragraph by discussing what I really liked about these 3 episodes, which is Cyril's arc. He had so much more to do in this arc than the first one, and I find the multiple layers at work to be pretty intriguing. The Gorman rebels think they've turned Cyril, but he's just playing double agent and informing for the Empire, all while Dedra is keeping the real reason for her involvement with Gorman a secret from Cyril. The relationship feels really complex in this arc, and I'm looking forward to how these 2 characters continue to develop. All right, side note really quick before I talk about the rest of that. Was anybody else a little bit curious about what happened when she told him to turn the lights off? A little curious. A little curious? A little curious. How did that go? How does I think we all have an idea of how that goes, but just a little curious about that. Anyway, just a little intrusive side thought with respect to that. I think the thought, Alex, that people are saying like it should have been called Rebellion instead of Andor, I think that's a recency bias because of this week's arc. And I get it to an extent, but it's not 3 episodes, it's 12 episodes, right? As much as Cassian was involved in the first arc, we have yet to see how much he will be involved in the 3rd and 4th arcs, and we know how much he was involved in season 1. So I think that, because of 1 week of him not being the focus, that's not enough to say, oh, it should have been called Rebellion instead of Andor. I mean, yeah, he did take a step back. He did. And I don't know. I just, over the course of an entirety of a season, 12 episodes, it's a blip in the radar for me. It's not the same as when Boba Fett was given 2 weeks off just before his season finale for the Book of Boba Fett, especially since, at least in Andor's case, they didn't bring in another show and do 2 episodes of another show like they did with The Mandalorian, and like they did 2 full episodes of The Mandalorian, episodes 4 and 5 of the Book of Boba Fett, and gave Boba a week off. That's not what happened here, and that was episodes 5 and 6, pardon me, and that was in that case. Like, that was a 7-episode season. This is a 12-episode season with 4 different 3-episode arcs. So, yeah, I'm waiting to see what happens in the last 6 episodes before I, give any weight to this idea that, it should be called Rebellion instead of Andor. And I'm perfectly okay with them keeping it a limited series because, again, Alex, this show is supposed to lead into Rogue One. Rogue One is the end of Cassian Andor's story, and this show is supposed to lead into that. So, this show is always going to have an ending. And as far as like other Tales of the Rebellion, well, you can make a Rebellion show still, and you can do it in this time period. You can do it in the sequel trilogy time period. They can do whatever they want. Okay, I think they made that abundantly clear that Lucasfilm can go in whatever directions they want with respect to the stories that they're telling, whether it's about Andor, whether it's about Ahsoka, whether it's about Obi-Wan, whether it's about The Mandalorian, or Skeleton Crew, Acolyte even, right? It doesn't matter. Like, they're going in whatever directions they want because that's how massive of a universe they have to play with Star Wars, and I'm perfectly fine with that, truthfully. So, yeah, I hear you on that. So let's move on to Thunderbolts, because Alex does have some thoughts to share, but he wasn't sure if I had seen it yet or if I was going to do a spoiler-filled episode. Yes, I am, but he kept his thoughts brief and spoiler-free. He said it was not quite what he expected it to be. He says, I'm not going to say why or how since that could lead to spoiler territory, so all I'll say is that this movie went places I really did not think we were going. I've been kind of bored and lukewarm with Marvel over the past few years, but after the post-credit scenes in this, things are starting to feel like how they felt in the lead up to Infinity War. I am officially hyped for Marvel again. Okay, I'm getting the impression that maybe outside of John, and John said he liked the movie, but I think all of us collectively, like, we do enjoy Thunderbolts. Maybe to different degrees, And again, I will talk about FLITE review this weekend, Alex. I'm definitely going to have some spoiler-filled thoughts, and then we will talk in depth about it next week, I'm sure, on Friday FLITE. No question about it. But yeah, I think by and large, we have some favorable opinions with respect to Thunderbolts and where the MCU is going to head out of that. But continuing on with Alex's email, he says, before getting into my Star Trek thoughts this week, I just want to take a brief moment to thank Amr for obliging my Star Trek spoiler request. Once I finish season 3 of The Next Generation, I'm planning on going back and listening to his thoughts and doing the same for the rest of the seasons of TNG. I will say I'm definitely looking forward to when he gets to the stuff I've already seen so that I don't have to be careful with spoilers. I'm excited to hear his spoiler thoughts on the original series, the animated series, and the first few movies with the cast from the original series. Oh, yes, absolutely. I would love to hear those as well. But as for Alex's TNG update, he said this week he watched Deja Q. He says, okay, this was a fun episode, Deja Q, Season 3 TNG. When Q was telling Picard he considers him a friend, he actually had me unsure as to whether or not he was telling the truth. Eventually, it became clear that he was just using the Enterprise for protection, but this brought up a new thought, which I'll get to in a second. Then he says, how did the Calamarains know where to find Q and that he was removed from the continuum? Did I miss something? Or should we just assume the other Qs told the Calamarains for fun or something? It could be as simple as that, seriously. It could absolutely be as simple as that. Also, we don't really know all of the, the capacity, the abilities of the Calamarain, so there's many different ways that they could have detected him aboard the Enterprise, to be honest with you, as far as his presence and whatnot. Maybe they'd been trying to attack him the whole time and he was keeping them at bay because he was a Q, and then when they found out that he wasn't, they pounced. Or at least attempted to in that regard, for sure. So then Alex says, this episode was actually the first time I liked Q. In all his previous appearances, he's just been an annoying, irritating inconvenience, but it was different this time. He was funnier than usual and obviously more humble, albeit through no choice of his own. This episode made me wonder if there's some possibility of him and the Enterprise crew one day being something approximate to friends. Alex, I have a definitive answer to that question, but that's a spoiler, and I will not go any further, so you'll have to keep watching in order to find that out. But know that most certainly you haven't even remotely seen the last of Q and expect multiple appearances before this show is over. I'll just throw that out there. So he says, not sure if I pointed this out before, but Q reminds me a lot of Mixie Spitlick from DC. Yes, but for more noble purposes. That's all I'll say about that. And then he says, Data laughing at the end was just hilarious. It can be tough for actors to sell hysterical laughter, but man, Data's laughter here was contagious. Yeah, it was really good. I mean, Brent Spiner, fantastic actor. Just outstanding job with that character. And of course, Data's my favorite character, in the entire franchise. So yeah, I hear you on that. He says, next episode is Matter of Perspective. A Matter of Perspective. Ooh, that's a good one. Live long and prosper, Alex. Yes, indeed. Looking forward to that one, Alex. Thank you for the insight. And again, FLITE review, Thunderbolts. Listen to that. And then we will dive in headfirst into some spoiler conversation next week on Friday FLITE. No doubt about that, good sir. And we'll close out this week's episode with an email from Jared Cardos. No subject line. He just says, hey, Ray, hope you're doing well. Before I get into stuff from recent episodes, I wanted to shout out one of the reasons why I'm behind on other stuff like Andor. And that's the newest game that came out this past week called Clair Obscur Expedition 33, a wonderful new RPG that is the first game by the French studio Sandfall Interactive, who, from what I understand, he says, was formed by former Ubisoft employees who wanted to do their own thing, and man, had they delivered. The plot is very interesting. It's set in what I would best describe as a retro fantasy and fractured version of France called Lumiere, and every year in a neighboring island known only as the Continent, a mysterious figure known only as the Paintress paints a number, and everyone in Lumiere who is that age dies, and it is slowly counting down. It started at 100, and now it's at 33. In an effort to do something about it, Lumiere sends a group of volunteers at their last year to live as expeditioners on a mission to sail to the continent, study its strange creatures and inhabitants, discover how this happened, and ultimately stop the Paintress so that she may never paint death again. Wow, that's very complex and intriguing. He says, now I'm about 15 hours into the game and just finished the first act, but so far it's been absolutely incredible. The story is well told, brilliant writing, and wonderful performances from some big names in Hollywood like Charlie Cox and Andy Serkis, and in video games like Ben Starr and Jennifer English. creating some wonderful characters who feel authentic and real, even if they are only there for a short amount of time. It managed to almost move me to tears in just the first hour alone in its prologue, and I haven't had a game that did that to me so early in a long, long time. Then it went and did it again at the end of the first act. If it keeps at this level, it could be up there with one of the best stories in gaming. Oh, all right, there you go. He says, but of course, it's more than just a story, and the combat is also really fun. Now, it is a turn-based RPG, and I can almost hear you tuning out, but I will say this game does some exciting things with that style of combat, he says. You have stuff like being able to, at any time during your turn, go into a third-person shooter mode and take out enemy weak points to timing button presses on your big attacks like combos. But the real game changer is a dodge and parry system during enemy attacks, which combined together gives the combat the strategic feeling of the best turn-based RPGs with the dynamic feeling of action RPGs. Combine all that with stunning visuals and a sublime soundtrack, this is an easy shoe-in for Game of the Year for me. And what's cool about this game, he says, is that there is a bit of Sinner's energy to it. It's a completely new IP, but has inspiration and obvious love of what came before. From what I've seen, it's very much a celebration of France and its artistic and cultural roots in history, though in E33's case, I get the feeling it plays more into the stereotypes, like having optional fights with creepy mime statues that award goofy outfits, he says. And it's been far more successful than I think most people imagined, he says. Claire Obscure managed to sell over 1 million copies in just a few days, and that's not counting the people who got it on Game Pass. Other popular measurements like Steam player counts and Twitch viewings have also been impressively high, beating out some of the top contenders, even an Elder Scrolls Oblivion remaster that Shadow dropped that same week. While I do love my franchises and all that, he says it's still just cool to see new entries make big impacts. Ah, so you've been definitely occupied with gaming. I gotcha. All right, Claire Obscure. Expedition 33, have to keep that one in mind for sure. But he says, but through all that, I did manage to check out a movie that's been out for a minute, but certain recent events seem to give it an extra life, and that's Conclave. Ah, yes, that's right. Conclave, for people who don't know, got a massive boost in like rentals and viewings the day after Pope Francis died. For obvious reasons, because the conclave, I think, is going to start pretty soon here, and we're going to be on the search for that white smoke for the electing of a new pope. And I haven't seen that movie personally, but it is on my radar. I would like to see it. Maybe I'll watch it in the next week or so while the pope search is happening. But Jared here says it was really good, a well-paced and tense sort of political thriller with some great performances from the likes of Ralph Fiennes, John Lithgow, and Stanley Tucci, as well as excellent music and cinematography, and the ending just ties everything together. It could definitely be looked at as controversial, but without getting into spoilers, I think it says some interesting things about the idea of the church and religion and society going forward. Definitely worth a watch. It probably will not offend me in the slightest, especially given my Catholic raising, so I'm perfectly fine with that, Jared. And it got great reviews beforehand when it released, so yeah, I think I will try and check that out here in the next couple of weeks or so. So Jared then says a few thoughts from Friday Flight. He says with the whole Burton Schumacher Batman thing and how they weren't made to be connected, the interesting thing is that they almost were, he says. It's been talked about that Schumacher was planning on doing another Batman movie after Batman and Robin called Batman Triumphant. Yes, that's right, I've heard about that. Which would have had Scarecrow and Harley Quinn as the main antagonists, and he talked about how he had plans on making it darker, with a flashback to Bruce's early stints as Batman taken straight out of Batman Year One that comes from Scarecrow using his fear gas, and would have included a new scene with Jack Nicholson as the Joker. But of course, then Batman and Robin landed the way it did, and the project was scrapped. It did kind of come back, though. While it's not a complete translation, DC recently released a sequel to their Batman 89 comic that had a lot of similar elements called Batman 89 Echoes, and he sent the cover for that. Which reminds me, I've been meaning to look into like reigniting my DC Universe Infinite subscription, and I just have not done that yet. I'll have to look into that pretty soon here. But yeah, those details, the whole thing about Scarecrow and Harley Quinn, Jared, that just kind of further reinforces one of my thoughts about Batman Forever, is that they really did draw heavy inspiration from the animated series for that movie and Batman and Robin, not just in terms of look, but also in terms of like villain personifications. Obviously Heart of Ice was without question ripped for Arnold's Mr. Freeze story in Batman and Robin for sure, and Poison Ivy as well. And certainly the debut of Arkham Asylum on screen, just with the way the sign looked, the way they shot it, absolutely evoked the animated series. So yeah, the animated series influence was heavy. And it certainly would have been in Batman Triumphant if it had in fact been Scarecrow and Harley Quinn that were the villains in that. And yeah, that would have been interesting. We would definitely be having a very different conversation about all the different Batman actors if they had actually connected all of them with that film. So intriguing. And he says, and yeah, I got a cop to that epic mix-up I had there in my last email. I meant Doug Jones as Silver Surfer. I got his name mixed up with Toby Jones, famous for playing Zola in the MCU, and the Dream Lord in Doctor Who. Yes, I don't know about that second one, but I do know about Zola, yes. He says, I know why I got the names mixed up since they are so similar, but yeah, not proud of that one. It's all right. I was just trying to clarify and make certain that we were talking, because I was second guessing. I didn't know if it was Doug Jones. Silver Surfer came out so long ago, man. I did see that in theaters, but yeah, I couldn't immediately remember. I thought it was him, but either way, no harm, no foul. He says, since you asked during Friday Flight, yes, Troy Baker played Joker a couple of times, most notably in the prequel games in the Batman Arkham series. Okay. But he's also probably most famous for his iconic role as Kai Lang in Mass Effect 3? Kidding. Oh, wow. You actually had me thinking for a second there. And then I was like, wait a minute, did he have any lines? I don't remember, but either way. He said, I mean, as Joel in the Last of Us series. Okay. Fun fact, though, Troy is also, as of right now, the only actor who has played both Batman and the Joker, and even once in the same project. He also played Batman in Batman the Telltale series, The Enemy Within, and played as both in the Batman Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated movie. All right, cool. Troy Baker, getting some work in, huh? You also talked about adaptations working as a creator's second draft, which I think there's definitely some truth there, and the two best examples of this come from Robert Kirkman. With The Walking Dead, Kirkman didn't realize until far along in writing the comic that the main office of the CDC is in Georgia, where he set the series in and added that plot in the comic as soon as he found out. But when the show was being made, they decided to change things so that the CDC was the first place they went to. Then in Invincible, that twist involving Omni-Man didn't show up until like issue 7 of the book, and those first few issues of the book gave the feeling of this being more of an all-ages book. So when that issue came out and Omni-Man did what he did, I'm pretty sure 99% of the people listening know what I'm talking about, if not just from the memes, but just making sure. There were parents who gave him all sorts of grief because they were letting their young kids read this comic, and suddenly it was very much not for kids. So when they adapted Invincible, I think they had that in mind. So there was a lot of blood and gore from the start, and that twist happened in the first episode. Okay, good. You're talking about season 1 of Invincible, because for a second, I thought you were talking about that twist, but I wasn't sure. Yes, you were. Okay, good. I've watched season 1 of Invincible, and I know exactly what twist you're talking about. Cool. He said also at one point, the talk about longer seasons of television came up, and I believe you or someone else was talking about how 20-plus episode seasons might only work for the likes of sitcoms. And while I agree that model is kind of archaic, I do think longer seasons can work depending on what kind of show and story it is. A good example of this is something I talked about a little while ago and finished up pretty recently is The Pit. That is a 15-episode season taking place over one day in the 12-hour shift of the doctors and nurses at an understaffed Pittsburgh hospital. The season goes up to 15 for reasons I won't spoil, and I think it works to really show the stress and toll that the job can have on the people working it. And it's been largely successful. From what I understand, The Pit has been second to only some of the bigger HBO shows like The White Lotus and The Righteous Gemstones, and is considered the most successful Max original to date, with a season 2 already in production to come out next January, with the promise that there would be a new season every year. And I think the series absolutely works for the long season length. It really makes you feel the stress and the struggle these characters go through on a daily basis, and really lets you get a good idea into who these characters are. And this season length is feasible because it's pretty cheap to do a medical show in one enclosed set with mostly makeup and prosthetics in comparison to, say, the big-scale space opera of The Mandalorian. Okay, so with respect to that, Jared, I'll provide an example from my own favorite franchise as well, which is Star Trek Discovery. The first season of that show was 15 episodes. And then season 2, where they introduced Pike and the USS Enterprise, was 14 episodes. Season 3 and 4 were both 13 episodes apiece. And then the last season, the final season, was 10 episodes. So I hear you in terms of like the structure. 15, I don't put that in the same category as 24. I know it is technically longer. It's certainly longer than what we've seen with like these 6-episode Marvel seasons and some of these 9-episode Marvel and Star Wars seasons. I get that, right? And like even 10, It's a big difference between 10 and 15. I understand that. But there's an even bigger difference, in my opinion, from 15 to 24. And the people that I'm addressing with respect to the 24 episode seasons are the ones that want to go back to, for lack of a better way to put it, the way the CW used to do stuff. Remember the Arrowverse shows? Those would be like 22, 23 episode seasons, right? That's what they're talking about, because they want villain of the week stuff. And that's what the example that I brought up was talking about, making the Mandalorian and Grogu villain of the week, and having Bo-Katan Kryze and like doing like villain of the week stuff, right? Monster of the week, that type of deal. And that's what I think is outdated. That's what I think. And that does go more into structure like you're talking about. Something that you're talking about like with the pit, oh, sure, that works. Certainly. But again, I also 15 episodes, I don't judge that the same way as I do 20 plus episodes. I do think there's a difference, but in 5 to 9 more episodes, I do think is a massive difference in many ways. And so I'm good with 15. Like 10 to 15 absolutely works. And however, the amount of episodes that you need to tell a story up to like 15 or so, I'm good with that. I think that's cool. I just don't think, or the people that keep touting or championing 24 episode seasons, they're literally people that are asking for filler, demanding filler. Like they believe they want filler because they only believe in extremes, right? Either give me as many episodes as I want, like back in the old days, or don't give me any, right? If you give them 6 or 10 and they really like it, then they get all pissy, right? Even if you give them 15 and they really like it, they'll still get pissy. That's why they're asking and demanding for longer seasons, because it's an irrational demand in that regard. And their perspectives behind it are very irrational. But your perspective, Jared, is quite rational. And yes, I'm glad for the success of the pit in that regard. I haven't watched any of it. Shonda has. I didn't know that it was considered that successful on Max, but hey, great for them. And yeah, most certainly, I do believe that can work. Absolutely. He says, as for your most recent episode of FLITEcast, this whole debacle over this deal that Coogler got for Sinners is really interesting. It does make me wonder just how many other directors have gotten this deal over the years, how common it might have been in the past versus now. I wonder how many of those classic filmmakers are people of color. I would venture to say probably none, Jared, but hey, who knows? Maybe someone would like to do that research. He says, like, I can maybe see Spike Lee getting a similar sort of deal, but that's probably about it. Yeah, you're probably right. He's the only black director I can think of that would get a deal like that. He says, I wonder what other explanations for all this turmoil over him getting this deal could be. I could see there being some pushback due to his age and the number of films he's made versus other classic directors. There could be some snobby reasons of Coogler mostly having done franchise films, including the MCU before it, but even with all those possible explanations, the fact that you almost never see women and people of color get these kind of deals is a very damning sign. Hopefully the success of Sinners makes it so that we can start seeing the tide turn. Yes, I 1000% agree with everything that you just said there, Jared. And now on to this. He says, and people are fan casting Sinners already? Really? That's weird. Like, the thing with the fan cast, from my experience, is that it tends to be for characters who don't have their roots on the screen, going from written descriptions or works of art, but I never see it for movies that have barely been out a month. Very weird and kind of disrespectful for the actors that were on there, honestly. Completely disrespectful, no doubt. But he says, I think that's enough for this one, especially since I'll be running off to see Thunderbolts pretty soon. Looking forward to your thoughts on that, as well as other future episodes. Thank you, Jared, for the feedback. You sent this earlier today, about 6 hours ago. So this I would have been in the middle of watching the movie when you sent this. So hopefully you have seen it by now. And we can all have spoiler-filled conversations, because one more time, that episode of Flight Review, look for that this upcoming weekend. The very next episode posted on theflightcast.com after this episode of Friday Flight will be a full spoiler-filled Flight Review episode on Thunderbolts. I have a lot to say. So stay tuned for that, Jared. Stay tuned for that. Stu and Anthony and anybody else, Phil, whoever has watched the film, Alex, any of the rest of you, stay tuned for that so we can have some spoiler-filled conversations about it next week, indeed. Thank you, as always, for the feedback, Jared. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Friday Flight. Thank you so much to those of you who sent in feedback this week. John R., Stu Little, Alex De Silva, and Jared Cardos, thank you indeed. And one last time, if I haven't mentioned it enough already, stay tuned for my full spoiler-filled review of Thunderbolts on Flight Review, the next episode of any show that will be posted at theflightcast.com. And also a reminder, Flightbox is on a bit of a hiatus as far as Andor is concerned, But when season 2 has concluded, stay tuned for a massive recap of that particular show in an episode of Flight Box that will also be on that Wednesday. So the next couple of weeks, it'll be off for a bit, but we'll get back to it as soon as Andor season 2 is over, and we'll go over the whole season in its entirety and talk about where we go and how well it lines up with Rogue One at that point. But thank you so much for listening to this show. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast. If any of you have any thoughts with respect to Thunderbolts, you want to have some spoiler-filled conversation about it next week on Friday Flight, you want to talk about anything else going on with respect to movies, TV, and other sorted media, you know where to find me on Threads and Instagram at the Flightcast, on Blue Sky at Flightcast. You can post on the YouTube posting for this particular episode of Friday Flight. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page, and of course I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there, have a great weekend, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.